Chris Summers, welcome back to Unmuzzled TV. Mate, we're here today at Noosa Courthouse.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Thanks for having me back.
Absolute pleasure. So, look, today we just wanted to follow up from the first interview and kind of get your impression of your time here, having the case heard within the court system, mate. So tell us a little bit about the 3 times you were here.
Yeah, look, there was 3 times we were here. Look, the first one was a plea hearing. Basically, they just wanted me to enter a plea, guilty or not guilty. That was all they're interested in. I told the magistrate, look, I can't enter a plea. I said, because to be entering a plea, whether it's guilty or not guilty, is basically submitting to the legislation in which they're relying upon.
Okay.
So that's why I told the magistrate I couldn't enter a plea. It was then that he went forward and he told me that he was going to adjourn it so I could seek legal advice.
Okay, so that was the first hearing or mention.
That's right.
So you then came back again.
Yep.
And there was a bit of excitement at that one. So obviously you came back, you represented yourself again.
I did.
And again, the magistrate wanted you to enter a plea. So just talk us through that second one, because I know there was no video or no camera media here. I know the Sunshine Coast Daily ran a story.
Yep.
But tell us about that second hearing or mention.
Yeah, well, look, it came in the second time. It was a different magistrate. They basically wanted me to do the same thing. They asked me if I'd gone and seek legal advice. I told them I didn't need to speak to any lawyer. I'm representing myself. Then they basically asked me to enter a plea. I told them the same thing. I said I can't enter a plea. Essentially, I'll be submitting to the legislation in which you're relying upon. And I said, I've issued a notice of discovery or a notice to produce, whichever you want to call it, to the prosecution, asking them to prove the validity of the law.
Yeah.
And that hadn't been satisfied yet. The prosecution was actually in default. After 28 days, they had been formally issued a default notice.
Okay.
And the magistrate just chose to simply ignore it.
Okay. And at that, it was a hearing or mention?
It was a mention.
It would be a mention.
It was a mention.
So at that mention, the magistrate sought for you to enter a plea, and ultimately you didn't enter a plea because you didn't feel the court had satisfied the questions that you had been asking of them. So the magistrate entered a plea on your behalf, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct, Matt. I was in the middle of, I was telling the magistrate, I said, there's multiple court cases, and I actually named 3 of them and read out those high court cases to the magistrate. And I said, look, these magistrates here have put a ruling down, and a ruling is as good as law when it comes to the High Court. And in those cases, it says that the obligation is on the prosecution to produce the validity of the law when asked. And the way they do that is to produce the proclamation certificate.
Okay. And obviously they either chose not to do that or they weren't able to do that.
That's exactly right. And in my opinion, in my research from what I've learned, they weren't able to do that.
Okay. Because one would imagine in that situation it would be a lot easier for them to simply provide that, take away your objections, and then, I suppose, satisfy your doubt in the validity of the laws, to then direct you to actually give, a guilty or not guilty plea.
That's exactly right, mate. I was halfway through saying this to the magistrate and informing him of what was going on, and it was then he just straight over the top of me and yelled at me and said, "Get out of my court, this matter's finished, I'm entering a plea of not guilty, we're adjourned to the 3rd of March.
Okay.
And I said, Your Honour, you can't do this, you can't enter a plea on my behalf. You've got a notice of discovery here which you're totally ignoring, which is a fact of law, and you just want to push on. And he said, get out of my court. And it was then that the police come over and said, mate, that's 2 warnings, get out. And I said, we're not finished here, Your Honour. I said, you've got questions to answer here under the law. And he just chose to ignore it. It was then they warned me a 3rd time, and I said, mate, this is a public court. You've just as much right to be here as any man does. I said, I'm not leaving until these questions are answered.
Yeah.
And then they decided to arrest me.
Okay. And look, we were here on that day. For the sake of the viewers, we've taken an interest in this because we think it's a story that needs to be told, evidently. And it was then that a member of the gallery kind of stood up in the middle of all of this and said, I bear witness to His Honour entering a plea on the defendant's behalf.
Yeah, that's right. There was another gentleman there. I won't go into any names or anything, but yeah, he stood up and he said into the public gallery, is there anyone else here that's witnessed what's going on? of the magistrate entering a plea on the defendant's behalf, and there was a half a dozen people that all jumped up and said yes.
My recollection is quite a few people actually bore witness to that.
Yeah, that's correct.
So at that point in time, from what I understand, your mum was in the courtroom?
Yeah, look, Mum was there, just a bit of moral support, and it was at that time when it all got into a bit of a kerfuffle, you know, and they slapped the cuffs on me and tried to arrest me. Then she pulled her phone out and started recording.
Right.
And then the magistrate actually said, that woman's recording, get her out of the court. So they arrested her as well and handcuffed her against her will.
So there was 3 people pulled from the courtroom. Yourself, the first gentleman that spoke up, and your mum.
Yep.
And you were all marched out by, I'm assuming, Queensland Police representatives.
Yep.
Now, when you got outside, that was when we were able to start filming, and we filmed you being taken over into Noosa Police Station.
Yep.
So, I mean, that must have been a different kind of surreal to what we were talking about last time, but I imagine was that something you expected?
No, to be honest, I didn't, Matt. I really thought, you know, that being a court, they would follow due process and not just make up their own rules and do what they want. Eh?
Yeah.
It's like I said to the magistrate, you know, you're entering into the realms of a star chamber. And I said, a star chamber is forbidden in the first paragraph of habeas corpus. I said, you're breaking the law, Your Honour. You're perverting, my words to him were, Your Honour, you are perverting the course of justice in the Commonwealth. That is a 10-year imprisonment term. I said, I'll have you held accountable to that, Your Honour. And that's what aggravated him then.
That you were questioning his authority or the legality of the law.
That's right.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, you marched out of the court, down into the police station. They've got your mum behind you. I mean, how were you feeling at that time? On top of the obvious frustration in trying to legally and with all, what's the word? With the entitlements that you believe you have, and many other people do, under the law, to question things, to ask for, you know, proof of laws that are being relied upon and so on. What's going through your mind as you're getting marched to the police station?
Oh, look, there's a number of things going through my mind, you know. Number one was like, are they really going to do this, you know? They just assaulted me. They had no right to arrest me to do what they did. The police come in, they slapped the cuffs on me, they manhandled me, all the rest of it, you know. It's just typical police brutality.
Now, there was no charges that actually came from that. They walked you over to the police station. They held you over there for how long were you held for?
They held me for about 4 hours. They came in, I kept asking them to talk to somebody, you know. I don't want a solicitor, but I was asking them, you know, can I seek legal representation? You know, I'm entitled to a phone call, to anything, mate. And they just totally ignored me. 4 hours I was in there. They brought me back over in handcuffs. Took everything off me, you know, shoes, the whole lot. They brought me back into the court in bare feet. When I came over, they put me in front of the magistrate. He basically said, look, you're here and you've got to show me why I shouldn't have you held in contempt of court, because that was the charge that they arrested me on, was contempt of court.
Right.
So then I said to him, look, what are you looking for, an apology? I said, because I don't think that you warrant an apology for the way you've acted. I said, I haven't done anything wrong here, Your Honour, you have. And he said, mate, this is just a conversation between me and you. And like, there was no public in there. When we were in there, it was a total...
So it's a closed court.
It's a closed court.
You've been held for 4 hours.
Yeah.
And you marched barefoot back into the court.
Yeah.
So the magistrate, who from your perception hasn't followed law, hasn't followed due process...
That's right.
...is having a friendly conversation with you.
That's exactly right.
And what was the means to the end of that?
At the end of it, basically, he wanted an apology, and I said, look, if an apology is what's needed to get me out of this situation, mate, I said, I'll sit here and I'll apologise for my actions to these 4 walls. I said, but I don't apologise for the arguments in court that I was raising. And he took that upon himself, and he said, look, I think you've shown me a reason why I should let it go, and he dropped all charges and released me.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
So you walk out of court, you re-gather your stuff from the police station, and that leads on to the hearing.
That's right.
Okay. Yep. So tell us about the hearing. So nuts and bolts. You came. I would imagine you contested again, and ultimately you were found guilty, but with no criminal charges, no loss of licence, and a $200 fine. Yet the police prosecution had a very different perspective, and they were seeking a lot more than what the magistrate handed down. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, well look, the first thing, even regarding just a $200 fine, they charged me with what's equivalent to high range drink driving, refusal to give a breath sample.
Right.
So they're saying that I was 1.5 above the blood alcohol limit, That's a minimum 6 months loss of licence for a start, I didn't lose my licence at all. So what's the reasoning behind that? When we went in there, I put a lot of good arguments towards the magistrate, I had 3 high court cases which I specifically read out to him and said this is what gives me the right to ask for the evidence of authority, to prove that the law is the law and produce a proclamation certificate. He basically told me that's not applicable in these proceedings, and I asked him and said, Your Honour, do you follow High Court proceedings? Do you follow the rules of the High Court and their verdicts that they make? And he just kept saying no comment. I asked him 3 times and he said, look, can't we all just be civil about this? And I said, well, until the questions are answered, Your Honour, we can't move forward.
Interesting. So we've got a situation where you can be pulled up on roadside, you can be asked questions, and by not answering the questions and not following the direction of the police officer because you question the validity of the laws they're relying upon, you can end up in court. Yet, from what I'm getting from this, you can basically reverse that role, question the magistrate on your interpretation of the law, and there is no response. He's not prepared to comment.
No, that's right.
And ultimately you walk away from the court with an outcome that is far under what even you expected if they were to find you guilty, despite you thinking that it wasn't just.
Yeah.
I mean, what?
Look, I was even challenging the jurisdiction of the court, I was telling them that it's my right to be heard in a Chapter 3 court, so that's a court in accordance with Chapter 3 of the Constitution.
Yeah.
It's a court where you sit in front of a jury, so to speak, or 12 of your peers, or 2 magistrates or more. It can't be a single magistrate.
Yes.
A single magistrate sitting there on his own is nothing more than a star chamber,
Yes.
He wasn't operating in Chapter 3 jurisdiction, so to speak. He didn't want to even acknowledge the fact that I'd brought it up and asked for it. Basically, he just went along and just did what he did. I think in the end, the reason why they only gave me a $200 fine is because they know that they're in the wrong. They don't want people to understand these things that I'm arguing. Because if everybody did it, well then what are they going to do, mate? This court here is a big money machine. That's all it is. People come in, they pump their money in and they're gone.
Yeah.
That's all it is. So for him to give me a $200 fine, that's a slap on the wrist. He's saying, here, just pay your fine, get out of it. We've got a guilty verdict here against him, so they can publish that in the news and say, hey, look, he was guilty, don't do what he did.
Yes.
But they didn't go to the full extent and take my licence because they know that I have the right for a judicial review.
Yeah.
I could take it to the Supreme Court and have him held accountable.
So look, continuing on with this, obviously we are now kind of sharing your story with the general public, and there's a lot of different opinions on whether that's right or wrong. We have been looking to try and find a police representative to actually come and present their side of the story, because to be as objective as we can, there's 2 ways to look at this. You're guilty.
Yep.
And as a resident of the Sunshine Coast, as a citizen, if you're wrong, my perception is, and with all due respect, Chris, they should slam you for publicly, I suppose, enabling people who question the legitimacy of laws. They should publicly, financially, via your licence, slam you so that people can definitively see that it is not okay to question a roadside RBT. Yet they didn't do that. And here you are seemingly slapped on the wrist so that you'll go away and not challenge them on the technicalities of law that it seems they've chosen to have no comment on.
That's right, look, it's the whole thing. They just want to brush it under the table, like these arguments that I've put forward in court and asked the magistrate and that he's totally ignored. I've even gone a step further and I've written letters to Pauline Hanson and Malcolm Roberts, and I've asked them to initiate a Senate inquiry down in Canberra into the disillusionment of the upper house in 1922. How did they get rid of that without a referendum?
Yeah.
You can't change the Constitution without a referendum. And to this day, I've had no answer,
Look, you raise a really interesting point. As we've discussed off camera, I was kind of made aware of Chris choosing to fight this. After I saw the viral video, just like many other people did, but we actually received an email copy of your reach out to Pauline Hanson and to the One Nation Party. And because we want to make sure to be seen to be offering equity to the people who have the power to kind of challenge these laws and the questions that you have, we actually forwarded a copy of that on to every single member of Parliament in Queensland.
Yep.
And look, I find it quite disturbing that I have not got a response whatsoever from anyone.
That's right.
So, I mean, we would imagine that if there was no validity in your observations, that somebody could simply send a document and a chronology of how the upper house was dissolved that is in line with the Constitution.
Yeah.
Yet it's
Look, it even comes back to the original video, you know, with the copper on the side of the road. And I said to him, I'm not consenting to anything, mate, until you can prove it. And he said to me, oh, look, I'm probably sure I can go back to the station and get something and prove it to you. To this day, he's never done that, you know.
Yeah.
So it just goes to show they've got nothing, mate. These laws they're making aren't really laws.
So look, moving on from that, is there anything else that you want to kind of share with the public about your understanding of the legality of it, about, you know, how we as citizens can urge the government to actually make these laws legally binding? Because as we discussed in the last video, we need RBT.
That's right.
We, as a society, in many, many different ways, we need to protect each other from each other because we are not all always at our best.
That's exactly right.
So to kind of move forward from this, I mean, you've plugged away to try and get answers. But, you know, to the public, we need laws that you, the public, can rely upon. We need laws so that people who have questions about the legitimacy of it can definitively have answers, so that someone who's doing the wrong thing, and I mean, it's really important to note here, the police officer that pulled you up later said in his statement, and we mentioned this in the last video, that he had no reason to believe that you were intoxicated whatsoever.
That's right.
And that's how he justifies letting you drive away without conducting the roadside breath test.
You know, how does he justify pulling me over in the first place if that's what he says?
Well, and look, that's a whole other can of worms, isn't it? And we notice on social media a lot of people have actually said, and again, we're not, you know, we're not lawyers, but we're of the understanding there's a lot of perceptions out there that one single officer doing a roadside random breath test on his own is not actually a lawful thing in itself.
That's correct.
Yeah, so look, Chris, again, thanks for meeting with us. Anything you want to add before we finish up?
No, look, mate, I think that's pretty much it, you know. Everyone's seen the video. Do a bit of research for yourself and just learn this, you know. Don't let these people push you around. Yeah. They've got no right to, mate. You've got to stand up for your rights.
Yep. So look, moving on from here, we're going to reach out to the New South Wales Police Force. We're also going, the Queensland Police Force. We're also going to contact the Queensland court system and ask them for comment on this. It will be very interesting to see if they have something public to say about it. We think they have a duty of care to you, the general public, to actually refute Chris's claims or start making amendments to the laws so that, you know, these questions can't be raised again in the future and lead to, you know, someone actually getting away with drink driving.
That's exactly right, mate. That's what it's all about in the end, mate. We're not here to have no laws, but we want the laws that we've got to be done correctly and to follow due process. Everyone's entitled to their rights, even the police, mate. We can't have a police state. We need them to follow the correct process. The checks and balances have got to be done.
Chris, thanks for meeting with us again.
Thanks very much, Matt.
Cheers, mate.